the framework that turned chaos into opportunity. It began at a moment when everything seemed to be falling apart. Markets swung violently, forecasts crumbled, teams scrambled to respond to problems they couldn't see coming. Inside the company, panic spread faster than solutions, and every familiar playbook failed at once. Yet in the center of that turmoil, one framework emerged, quietly at first, that would transform chaos into a force for growth. To understand why this story matters today, we need to return to a time when unpredictability became the company's greatest fear. Every division felt the pressure. Operations buckled under sudden surges. Product teams shifted priorities weekly, chasing fires instead of building futures. Leadership met constantly, searching for patterns in spreadsheets that no longer reflected reality. The company wasn't falling behind. Its world was moving too fast for its systems to keep up. Our story begins with an operations lead who refused to accept chaos as inevitable. While others searched for ways to restore the past, they focused on understanding the present. They noticed how crises revealed the company's blind spots, information gaps, slow decision-making, fragile processes built for stability instead of speed. And as the pressure mounted, the lead saw something others didn't. Buried inside the disruption was a map of what needed to change. The turning point arrived late one evening when the lead assembled a rough model on a whiteboard. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't even complete, but it captured a revelation. The company didn't need more control. It needed a system that could adapt. One that turned signals into action. One that replaced slow approvals with rapid learning. One that made uncertainty not a threat, but a catalyst. The first version of the framework was simple. 3 loops, 2 triggers. One principle: move with reality, not against it. When the lead shared it with their team the next morning, the idea sparked curiosity. Not because it promised perfection, but because it offered something far more valuable in a world of constant disruption: clarity. What no one realized yet was that this rough sketch, born from exhaustion and necessity, would soon become the foundation of a transformation that reshaped not only how the company operated, but how it recognized opportunity in places that once looked like collapse. The team gathered around the whiteboard studying the rough sketch that dared to suggest a different way forward. At first, the framework felt too simple to matter. 3 loops, 2 triggers, 1 principle. But as the operations lead walked them through each component, something shifted. For the first time in months, the chaos made sense. Not because the problems had vanished, but because they finally had a lens through which to see them. The first loop focused on real-time signals, data points often ignored because they didn't fit neatly into quarterly forecasts. These were the small warnings: sudden shifts in customer patterns, delays in specific regions, unusual spikes in usage. The company had always collected these signals, but they never acted on them quickly. The framework insisted they become the starting point, not an afterthought. The second loop centered on rapid interpretation. Instead of routing insights through layers of managers and approvals, the team would evaluate signals immediately, identifying what required action within hours rather than weeks. It was a direct challenge to the company's deeply ingrained hierarchy, which valued certainty over speed. But in a volatile environment, waiting for perfect clarity meant reacting too late. The third loop focused on action, small, reversible steps designed to test hypotheses, rather than commit to full-scale changes. This approach unsettled some team members at first. They were accustomed to detailed plans, polished presentations, and long-term commitments. But when the operations lead outlined how micro-adjustments could prevent massive failures, resistance began to soften. Still, the framework sparked tension across departments. Finance questioned how rapid responses would affect budgets. Product teams worried about constantly shifting priorities. Leadership feared a loss of control. The company wasn't built for fluidity. It was built for predictability, and yet predictability was exactly what the world no longer offered. To demonstrate the framework's potential, the operations lead selected a small test case, a recurring bottleneck in the supply line that had plagued the company for months. Using the new loops, the team identified overlooked signals, traced the cause to a misaligned vendor process, implemented a tiny experimental fix, and measured the outcome within days. The result was immediate improvement. The success caught leadership's attention, not because of the magnitude, but because of the speed. For months they had thrown resources at the bottleneck with no progress. Now, a simple structured response, a quiet loop repeated 3 times, solved what entire committees had failed to address. Momentum grew. Teams began experimenting with the framework on other problems. A sudden drop in user engagement revealed design issues that were fixed before complaints escalated. An unexpected surge in demand was stabilized through early signal detection. Even customer support, overwhelmed for weeks, found relief as action loops addressed root causes rather than symptoms. But not everyone embraced the shift. A group of senior managers argued that reacting too quickly would introduce instability. They insisted the company needed more data before making changes, more meetings before approving action, more certainty before moving forward. Their concern wasn't illogical. Years of success had taught them to trust caution. Yet caution was no longer neutral. It had become a liability. The operations lead faced the pushback directly. They explained that the framework wasn't a replacement for strategy. It was a replacement for paralysis. The world was no longer generous enough to allow slow decisions. The only way forward was to build a system that learned continuously and adjusted fearlessly. It was a difficult truth to accept. And the real test, the one that would reveal whether the company truly understood what it was facing, was just ahead. The real test arrived without warning. A sudden disruption in one of the company's key regions threw operations into chaos. Orders stalled, customer complaints surged, and the systems that once felt stable buckled under the pressure. In the past, this kind of crisis would have triggered a familiar cascade: emergency meetings, long chains of approvals, and slow-moving task forces scrambling to diagnose the problem. But this time, something different happened. The operations lead activated the framework. Within minutes, teams began scanning for early signals. Data analysts flagged an unusual traffic pattern in the affected region. Support teams reported a cluster of similar complaints. Engineers identified a bottleneck in a process no one had monitored closely before. The signals arrived from every corner of the organization, forming a pattern that once would have taken weeks to uncover. The second loop kicked in immediately. Instead of waiting for full certainty, cross-functional teams gathered in a rapid response session to interpret the signals. They realized the disruption wasn't caused by a single failure. It was a cascade triggered by a small upstream delay that had multiplied across multiple systems. In the old model, identifying this truth would have taken countless meetings. Under the framework, it took an hour. The third loop, the action loop, moved even faster. The lead proposed a small reversible intervention. Reroute a portion of the workload to a secondary pathway that had been underutilized for months. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't even a permanent one, but it was enough to break the cascade and stabilize the region. The team implemented it immediately, monitored the outcome in real time, and watched the metrics begin to recover. By the end of the day, the crisis had been contained. The speed stunned the organization. Executives accustomed to slow, cautious adjustments found themselves witnessing a new kind of response, one grounded not in control, but in agility. Departments that once operated in silos were suddenly aligned around shared signals. Teams who had rarely spoken to one another now collaborated seamlessly. The framework had done more than solve a crisis. It had revealed how much potential the company had lost by insisting on certainty before action. But the success created its own friction. Some senior leaders, uncomfortable with how quickly decisions were made, argued the company had been lucky. They warned that rapid responses could introduce new risks or lead to inconsistent customer experiences. They wanted the framework toned down, constrained, regulated back into the comfort of slower decision cycles. Stability, they argued, comes from control. The operations lead disagreed. Stability, they explained, comes from readiness, from being able to adapt before problems grow uncontrollable, from understanding that the world no longer rewards those who predict perfectly, but those who respond thoughtfully. Tension escalated. Supporters of the framework emphasized how much had been gained. Fewer backlogs, quicker recoveries, visible improvements in customer satisfaction. Critics countered that speed without oversight was dangerous. The company stood at a crossroads. The framework could either become the foundation of a more adaptive future or be reduced to a temporary experiment remembered only when the next crisis exposed the flaws of old processes. Then came another surge of demand, larger than the first, more unpredictable, and capable of overwhelming the company entirely. A wave that would show once and for all whether the framework was a lucky experiment or the only viable path forward. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The second surge hit harder than anyone expected. Orders spiked beyond forecasts. Unexpected outages spread across key systems, and teams braced for the kind of collapse that had once taken entire quarters to recover from. But this time, no one waited for instructions. The framework activated instantly, not as an experiment, but as instinct. Signals poured in from every direction. Demand curves bent sharply upward. Support logs flared with new patterns. A regional slowdown hinted at an emerging bottleneck. In the past, these indicators would have been lost inside weekly reports, buried under layers of summaries and approvals. Now, they surfaced within minutes, visible to everyone who needed them. The second loop followed without hesitation. Cross-functional teams convened in a rapid analysis session, examining anomalies as they emerged. They discovered the surge wasn't uniform. It concentrated in specific clusters tied to a recent feature rollout that had resonated more strongly than anyone predicted. The company hadn't anticipated the response, but the framework made the signal impossible to miss. The third loop, action, moved even faster. Instead of deploying large, risky changes, the teams coordinated a series of targeted interventions. They rerouted traffic to stabilize load, increased capacity in affected regions, adjusted workflows to prioritize the most time-sensitive orders. Ops, engineering, product, and support worked as one unit, not because of hierarchy, but because the framework had taught them to share ownership of reality. Within hours, the system began to stabilize. What could have become a major operational failure instead revealed something powerful. The company had developed resilience, not the brittle kind that relies on control, but the flexible kind that thrives in uncertainty. Leadership watched the recovery unfold with a mixture of relief and realization. For the first time, chaos didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a teacher. The framework had turned disorder into insight, pressure into clarity, and unpredictability into opportunity. It hadn't prevented the surge. It had made the company strong enough to handle it. The breakthrough sparked a transformation across the organization. Teams rewrote their internal processes around the loops. Decision-making shifted from top-down to responsive. Meetings once filled with defensive explanations became sessions of collaborative learning. The company began anticipating disruptions instead of fearing them. Every signal, whether problem or possibility, became a prompt for exploration rather than panic. Months later, analysts reviewing the company's performance noted a strange pattern. While competitors struggled with volatility, this company seemed to move with it, almost like it had learned to read the currents others resisted. They didn't know about the whiteboard framework born from a moment of frustration. They only saw the results. Looking back, the operations lid reflected on the unlikely beginning. A rough sketch, a desperate attempt to make sense of chaos, a simple model that no one expected would matter. And yet it became the foundation of a cultural shift that redefined what the company believed about stability, control, and possibility. Because in the end, chaos wasn't the enemy. It was the invitation, the reminder that opportunity often hides in motion, not stillness. And the companies that rise are the ones willing to adapt before certainty arrives. Subscribe to join the journey. The frame